A scene that started as an ordinary Saturday afternoon at a roadside diner in rural Tennessee would become a defining moment that challenged every stereotype about leather jackets and motorcycles. When a desperate child's cry for help pierced through the rumble of Harley engines, a group of bikers faced a choice that would reveal who they truly were. What happened next spread across the nation, igniting fierce debates about justice, vigilantism, and the thin line between right and wrong. This is the story of Sarah Mitchell, the little girl whose tears changed everything, and the Brotherhood of the Road, who answered her call in a way no one could have predicted. It was June 15th, 2019. The Tennessee sun beat down mercilessly on the cracked asphalt parking lot of Rusty's Diner, a weathered establishment that had served travelers along Highway 70 for over 40 years. The chrome on 12 Harley-Davidson motorcycles gleamed like mirrors, reflecting the cloudless sky above Cookeville, a small city nestled between Nashville and Knoxville where everyone knew everyone, and strangers were noticed immediately. Inside the diner, the Brotherhood of the Road occupied their usual corner booth and 3 adjacent tables. These men, ranging in age from 32 to 68, wore leather vests adorned with patches that told stories of military service, lost brothers, and a commitment to causes that might surprise those who judged them by appearance alone. The Brotherhood wasn't your typical motorcycle club. No criminal enterprises, no drug running, no violent territorial disputes. Their patches told a different story entirely. Marcus Johnson, known to everyone as Bear, sat at the head of the group. At 54 years old and 260 pounds of solid muscle, Bear commanded respect without saying a word. His salt and pepper beard, braided down to his chest, and arms covered in tattoos depicting military insignia from his 20 years in the Marines, made him look exactly like what Hollywood would cast as a dangerous biker. But the reality couldn't have been more different. Bear's vest displayed patches most people never noticed. Purple Heart recipient, domestic violence awareness advocate, children's hospital volunteer. 3 tours in Iraq had taught him what real evil looked like, and he'd spent the last decade making sure he stood against it. Tommy Patterson, called Wrench by the Brotherhood, sat beside Bear. At 41, Wrench was leaner, his face weathered beyond his years, with kind eyes that seemed perpetually sad. Before the Brotherhood, Tommy had been a social worker in Memphis for 15 years, specializing in child welfare cases. He'd burned out after seeing too many children return to dangerous homes due to legal technicalities, too many mothers unable to escape their abusers because the system moved too slowly. He left his job, found the Brotherhood, and discovered a way to help that didn't involve endless paperwork and bureaucratic red tape. His social work license remained active. He knew the law, he knew the loopholes, and he knew exactly how to help people in crisis without crossing legal lines. The other members represented a cross-section of American working class. Jake, the electrician, Carlos, the high school teacher, Raymond, the retired firefighter, David, the hospital orderly. Men who worked hard, paid their taxes, and spent their weekends riding for charity. Every Saturday, weather permitting, they'd ride to either the Children's Hospital in Nashville or one of 3 domestic violence shelters across Middle Tennessee, delivering donated supplies and funds they'd raised through car washes, barbecues, and benefit concerts. On this particular Saturday, they were celebrating. They'd just delivered $15,000 worth of supplies to Hope Haven, a shelter that had been struggling with funding cuts. The mood was light. Raymond was telling an elaborate story about his grandson's Little League game. Carlos was showing photos of his daughter's graduation. These were not men looking for trouble. They were men who'd found purpose in protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. Bear checked his watch. 2:15 in the afternoon. They'd need to hit the road by 3 to make it back to Nashville before dark. He signaled the waitress for the check, his attention focused on organizing the ride formation for the journey home. That's when the sound cut through everything else. A child's scream, high-pitched, terrified, desperate. Every man at those tables had been trained, either by military service or life experience, to recognize the difference between a child's playful shriek and a genuine cry for help. This was the latter. Every head turned toward the diner's glass door. Through the sunlight's glare, they saw her. A little girl, no more than 8 years old, her blonde hair tangled and wild, wearing a faded pink t-shirt and dirty jeans, running full speed across the highway's shoulder. Cars swerved, horns blared. She didn't stop. Her small legs pumped desperately toward the diner parking lot, toward the motorcycles, toward them. Bear was on his feet before his conscious mind processed the decision. The entire brotherhood moved as one unit toward the door. They burst into the parking lot just as the little girl reached the first motorcycle, her small hands grabbing at the chrome handlebars to keep herself from collapsing. Tears and snot streamed down her face. Her eyes were wide with terror. Her breath came in desperate, choking gasps. Tommy reached her first, dropping to one knee to bring himself to her eye level. His social worker training kicked in automatically. Don't tower over a frightened child. Make yourself smaller. Speak softly. Establish trust quickly. He held up his hands, palms forward, showing he meant no harm. Sarah, they would learn her name later, looked at him with eyes that had seen too much suffering for someone so young. When she spoke, her voice was raw from screaming, breaking between words as she fought for air. "They're beating my mama. Please, please help. He's gonna kill her this time. Please." The words hit Bear like a physical blow. His own mother's face flashed before his eyes. He was 7 years old again, hiding in a closet, listening to his stepfather's fists connect with flesh, listening to his mother's cries, feeling utterly powerless. He'd made a promise that night, the night his mother died from internal bleeding that went untreated because she was too scared to go to the hospital. He'd promised that if he ever had the power to help someone in that situation, he would. No hesitation, no exceptions. "Where is your mama, sweetheart?" Tommy asked, his voice calm, despite the adrenaline coursing through his system. "The trailer park, right across the highway, number 42. He's gonna kill her. His brother's there too. Please help my mama." Bear looked at his brothers. He didn't need to say anything. Every man there knew what they were about to do. They also knew the risks. Intervening in a domestic situation could get them arrested, could get them hurt, could get them killed. Tennessee had strong castle doctrine laws. If they entered someone's property uninvited, the legal system might not see them as heroes. They might be seen as invaders, vigilantes, criminals. Raymond, the retired firefighter, already had his phone out, dialing 911. He spoke quickly and clearly, giving the dispatcher the address, the situation, requesting immediate police and ambulance response. The rest of the Brotherhood moved toward their bikes. They wouldn't wait for the police. They couldn't. How many minutes did this woman have? How many blows could a human body withstand? Carlos stayed with Sarah, wrapping his jacket around her shoulders despite the heat. He spoke to her in soft Spanish, then English, telling her she was brave, telling her help was coming, telling her everything would be okay. Sarah clung to him, her small body shaking with sobs. The trailer park sat directly across Highway 70, a collection of about 60 mobile homes in various states of disrepair. Some residents maintained their small plots with flower gardens and fresh paint. Others had given up years ago. Number 42 fell into the latter category. The single-wide trailer's white aluminum siding had gone grey with age and neglect. The small wooden porch sagged dangerously. A rusted truck sat on blocks in the dirt driveway. And from inside, even across the highway, they could hear it, shouting, crashing. A woman's scream suddenly cut short. Bear led the formation, his Harley's engine roaring as he crossed the highway, followed by 10 brothers. They left Carlos with Sarah and Raymond on the phone with emergency services, providing real-time updates. The bikes formed a semicircle in front of Trailer 42, engines idling, a wall of chrome and leather, and men who'd made a choice. Bear dismounted and approached the door. He could see through the torn screen. The trailer's interior was dim, but movement was visible. He pounded on the doorframe, his fist creating a sound like a war drum. The shouting inside stopped. For a moment, everything went silent except for the rumble of idling motorcycles and the distant sound of sirens beginning to wail in the distance. The door flew open. A man stood there, mid-30s, 6 feet tall, wearing a stained white tank top and jeans. His knuckles were red, his eyes were wild with rage and something else, crystal meth probably, given the jaw clenching and dilated pupils. This was Derek Thornton, they'd learn later. Behind him, deeper in the trailer, they could see another man. Similar build, similar look, Derek's brother, Matthew. And on the floor, partially visible through Derek's legs, a woman, motionless, blood on her face. Jennifer Mitchell, Sarah's mother. "What the hell do you want?" Derek snarled, his hand moving toward his waistband. Bear's military training assessed the threat in microseconds. Armed, possibly. High on stimulants, definitely. Violent, obviously. Rational, unlikely. "We got a call about a disturbance," Bear said, his voice deadly calm. "We're here to make sure everyone's all right. Police are on the way. Why don't you step outside and talk to us like men while they get here?" Derek's face twisted with rage and something that might have been fear. This was his territory, his home, his woman. Who were these people to interfere? "You got no right," he spat. "This is private property. This is between me and my family. You got no right." Tommy moved up beside Bear, his eyes scanning past Derek to assess Jennifer's condition. "Is that woman conscious?" he called out. "Mom, can you hear us? Can you move?" That's when Matthew made his mistake. He charged from the back of the trailer, probably thinking he could intimidate these men into leaving, probably too high to think clearly. He reached Derek's position at the door and threw a wild punch at Bear's face. Bear, trained in close-quarters combat by the United States Marine Corps, didn't even step back. He caught Matthew's wrist mid-swing, twisted it using the man's own momentum, and had him face down on the porch in less than 2 seconds. No excessive force, no broken bones, just controlled, precise defensive action. That's when everything exploded into chaos. What you witnessed in that moment outside Trailer 42 was the culmination of 3 years of hell that Jennifer Mitchell had endured in silence. To understand what happened next, you need to understand how she arrived at that place, on that floor, with her 8-year-old daughter running for help from strangers because there was no one else to run to. Jennifer Mitchell grew up in Nashville, the daughter of a nurse and a construction foreman. She was, by all accounts, a bright and ambitious young woman. She graduated from Hillsborough High School with honors, earned a scholarship to Tennessee State University, and was studying to become an elementary school teacher. She wanted to work with children, to make a difference, to create the kind of safe and nurturing environment she'd been fortunate enough to experience in her own childhood. At 22, with 1 semester left before graduation, she met Derek Thornton at a friend's party. Derek was charming at first. He told her she was beautiful. He paid attention to her in ways that made her feel special. He had dreams, he said, of starting his own construction business. He just needed the right partner, someone who believed in him. Jennifer, young and trusting, and raised to see the good in people, believed him. Within 6 months, she was pregnant. Within 8 months, they were living together. Within 9 months, she'd dropped out of college to work full-time at a grocery store to support them because Derek's construction job had fallen through. Actually, Derek had been fired for failing a drug test, but Jennifer didn't learn that truth until much later. Sarah was born in January of 2011. The pregnancy was difficult. The birth was harder. Jennifer developed postpartum depression, a chemical imbalance that made every day feel like drowning. She needed help. She needed support. She needed medication and therapy. What she got was Derek's resentment. He saw her sadness as weakness. He saw Sarah's crying as an annoyance. He started staying out late, started using crystal meth regularly instead of occasionally, started blaming Jennifer for everything wrong in his life. The first time Derek hit her, Sarah was 3 months old. Jennifer had asked him to help with the baby while she showered. She'd been wearing the same clothes for 2 days, hadn't slept more than 3 hours at a stretch in weeks, and desperately needed 10 minutes to feel human again. Derek was watching a football game. He told her to figure it out herself. When she pressed, explaining that she was exhausted and needed just a few minutes of help, he backhanded her across the face with enough force to split her lip. Then he left for 2 days. When he came back, he cried. He apologized. He swore it would never happen again. He blamed the stress of being a new father. He blamed his own childhood trauma, his own father who'd beaten him regularly. He promised he'd be better. Jennifer wanted to believe him. She needed to believe him. She had a 3-month-old baby, no degree, no income of her own, and no place to go. Her parents had retired and moved to Florida the year before. She'd lost touch with most of her college friends after dropping out. She was isolated. She was vulnerable. She was trapped. The second time happened a month later, then a week later. Then it became routine. Derek's pattern was predictable. He'd use meth for days, staying high and paranoid. He'd accuse Jennifer of cheating, of stealing from him, of not respecting him. He'd work himself into a rage over imagined slights. Then he'd hit her. Sometimes it was a slap. Sometimes it was punches to her body where bruises wouldn't show. Twice it was severe enough that she needed emergency room treatment, but both times she lied about how she'd been injured. She said she fell downstairs. She said she'd been in a minor car accident. Why didn't she leave? That's what people always ask, isn't it? Those who've never been in that situation, never felt the weight of financial dependence, psychological manipulation, and legitimate fear for their safety, they always ask why she didn't just walk away. The answer is complicated and heartbreaking and infuriatingly common. Jennifer tried to leave. Twice. The first time, when Sarah was 2 years old, Jennifer packed a bag and went to a domestic violence shelter in Nashville. She stayed for 3 days. Derek found her. He showed up at the shelter, sober and crying, with flowers and promises. He'd gone to a Narcotics Anonymous meeting, he said. He was getting clean. He couldn't live without her and Sarah. Please, just give him one more chance. The shelter staff advised Jennifer not to return, but they couldn't force her to stay. She went back. The second attempt came a year later. Jennifer had secretly saved $2,000, hiding money from her grocery store paychecks over months. She planned to take Sarah and drive to Florida, to her parents. She had the car loaded and ready to go while Derek was out. She was 30 minutes from leaving when Derek came home early. He found the hidden money. He found the packed suitcase. What happened next put Jennifer in the hospital for 5 days with 3 broken ribs, a fractured orbital bone, and internal bleeding. She told the hospital she'd been mugged. Derek visited every day, playing the concerned boyfriend, telling the nurses how terrible it was that Nashville had become so dangerous. After that, Jennifer stopped trying to leave. She focused on protecting Sarah. She made sure her daughter was fed, clothed, and as insulated from the violence as possible. She taught Sarah to hide in her room when Derek came home in a bad mood. She taught her to be quiet. She taught her survival skills that no child should need to learn. And she taught her something else, something that would ultimately save both their lives. She taught Sarah that if things ever got really bad, if Mama ever couldn't protect her anymore, she should run to anyone who looked safe, run to a store, run to a police officer, run to anyone who might help. By 2019, things had gotten worse. Derek's brother Matthew had moved in with them after being evicted from his own apartment. Matthew was worse than Derek in many ways, more violent, more paranoid, more aggressive. The two brothers fed off each other's rage. They used drugs together. They drank together, and when they were both high and drunk, they became unpredictable and extremely dangerous. Jennifer had managed to keep her job at the grocery store, but just barely. She'd called in sick so many times to cover bruises that her manager had warned her about potential termination. The money she earned went mostly to Derek's drug habit and Matthew's expenses. She and Sarah lived on whatever was left, which was rarely enough. They'd moved from Nashville to Cookeville 2 years earlier after Derek had gotten into trouble with his drug dealer. He owed money. He'd made threats he couldn't back up. They fled in the middle of the night, leaving everything behind, starting over in a small city where Derek thought he could avoid his past. In Cookeville, Jennifer was even more isolated. No family, no friends, no support system. She worked at a different grocery store, came home, took care of Sarah, and tried to survive. She'd stopped believing in escape. She'd stopped believing in a better future. She just focused on making it through each day, on keeping Sarah as safe as possible, on enduring until Sarah was old enough to leave on her own. Jennifer was 32 years old and felt like she'd already lived a lifetime of pain. June 15th started like too many other days. Derek and Matthew had been up all night using meth. Jennifer could always tell when they'd been using heavily. Their movements became jerky. Their eyes looked dead. Their paranoia reached delusional levels. She'd learned to make herself invisible during these times, but Sarah, at 8 years old, didn't always understand the danger. She'd asked her Uncle Matthew for help with homework. Such a simple, innocent request. Matthew had exploded, screaming that she was disrespecting him, that she thought he was stupid. Derek, already on edge, joined in. When Jennifer tried to intervene, tried to take Sarah to her room, Derek grabbed her by the hair. What happened next was the worst beating Jennifer had endured in 3 years. Derek punched her repeatedly in the face and stomach. When she fell, he kicked her. Matthew joined in. They took turns. They were going to kill her this time. Jennifer knew it with absolute certainty. Through the pain and the ringing in her ears, she heard Sarah screaming. She tried to tell her daughter to run, but her mouth wouldn't work properly. Blood filled her throat. She couldn't breathe. She was drowning. Then everything went dark. Sarah had never been more terrified in her short life, but she remembered what her mother had taught her. Run. Find help. Don't stop running until you find someone safe. She burst out the trailer door and ran. She didn't know where she was going. She just ran, and then she saw them, the motorcycles in the diner parking lot across the highway, men in leather, big, scary-looking men. But her mama had told her that sometimes the people who look scary are actually the safest ones to ask for help. So she ran toward them, across a busy highway, not caring about the cars, caring only about saving her mother's life. That's how we arrived at this moment. That's how a child's desperate cry for help reached men who'd spent years preparing for exactly this situation. Bear and the Brotherhood had responded to domestic violence calls before, always in coordination with shelters and law enforcement. But this was different. This was immediate. This was life or death. And they had seconds, not minutes, to decide what to do. When Matthew charged and Bear subdued him on the porch, Derek faced a choice. He could surrender peacefully and wait for police. He could de-escalate. But Derek Thornton, high on methamphetamine and faced with witnesses to his crimes, made the worst possible decision. He lunged back into the trailer toward where Jennifer lay unconscious. Tommy didn't hesitate. He followed Derek inside, with Wrench and Jake right behind him. The interior of that trailer was a nightmare. Trash covered every surface. Drug paraphernalia littered the counters. The air was thick with the chemical smell of meth production. And in the center of the small living room, Jennifer Mitchell lay motionless on the stained carpet, her face so swollen and bloody that she was barely recognizable as human. She wasn't moving. She wasn't making any sound. For a terrible moment, Tommy thought they were too late. Derek stood over her, his fists still clenched, his body language suggesting he was about to continue the assault, even with witnesses present. That's how far gone he was. That's how much the drugs had destroyed his ability to think rationally. Tommy, drawing on every hour of de-escalation training from his social worker days, held up his hands. Derek, buddy, it's over. Police are coming. Ambulance is coming. You need to step away from her and let us help her. This doesn't have to get worse for you. Derek's response was to reach for a kitchen knife on the nearby counter. He grabbed it and pointed it at Tommy with shaking hands. "Get out!" he screamed. "Get out of my house. This is my house, my woman. You got no right." Jake and Wrench flanked Tommy, spreading out to divide Derek's attention. All three men had experience with violent situations. Jake had been an Army MP. Wrench had broken up countless bar fights. They knew how to handle a man with a weapon without anyone getting killed. They also knew they were running out of time. Every second that Jennifer didn't receive medical attention was a second closer to permanent damage or death. Bear entered the trailer, leaving Matthew secured on the porch with two other Brotherhood members standing guard. He assessed the situation instantly. Weapon. Hostage, technically, though Jennifer was unconscious. Unstable suspect. Confined space. All the elements of a situation that could go very, very wrong. He also noted details that his military training had taught him to observe. The knife Derek held was a common kitchen blade, about 6 inches long. Derek held it wrong, thumb on top of the handle instead of wrapped around it, suggesting he wasn't trained in knife fighting. His stance was aggressive but unstable. His eyes kept darting toward the back of the trailer. Was there another way back there? Another exit? Bear made a decision. He stepped forward, putting himself between Tommy and Derek, becoming the primary focus. "Derek," he said, his voice dropping to a low, calm tone that somehow carried more authority than shouting. "Derek, look at me. My name is Marcus. I'm a Marine Corps veteran. I've been where you are, high, scared, feeling like the world is against you. I get it. But right now, you got one chance to do the right thing. That woman needs medical help. We're not here to hurt you. We're here to help her. Put the knife down. Let us help her. Then you can tell your side of the story to the police. But if she dies while you're holding that knife, there's no coming back from that. That's murder, Derek. That's life in prison. Is that what you want?" Something in Bear's words, or maybe just the calm authority in his voice, penetrated Derek's drug-addled brain. His hand wavered. The knife dipped slightly. For a moment, it seemed like he might actually comply. Then they all heard it. Sirens. Close now. Police were less than a minute away. Derek's paranoia spiked. He backed toward the rear of the trailer, still holding the knife, still blocking access to Jennifer. That's when Tommy made his move. While Derek's attention was on Bear and the approaching sirens, Tommy dropped low and rushed forward. He wasn't trying to be a hero. He wasn't trying to subdue Derek. He was trying to reach Jennifer, to check if she was still alive, to begin first aid if possible. Derek saw the movement in his peripheral vision and spun, slashing with the knife. The blade caught Tommy across his left forearm, a shallow cut, but enough to draw blood. Tommy didn't stop. He reached Jennifer and immediately checked for a pulse. She was alive, barely. Her pulse was weak and irregular. Her breathing was shallow. She was in critical condition. Tommy looked up at Derek, who stood frozen, staring at the blood now dripping from Tommy's arm onto his carpet. "You just assaulted someone in front of witnesses," Tommy said quietly. "That's on top of what you did to Jennifer. The hole you're in just got deeper, but you can stop digging. Put the knife down. Step outside. Let us save her life. That's the only play you got left that doesn't end with you dying in prison." The trailer door burst open. 3 Cookville police officers entered with weapons drawn, shouting commands. "Everyone freeze. Drop the weapon. Hands where we can see them." Derek, faced with armed police, finally dropped the knife. He was taken down hard, face pressed into the carpet, handcuffed and dragged outside. Matthew was already in custody. The Brotherhood members were ordered to step back, hands visible, until officers could sort out who was who and what had happened. Paramedics rushed in 30 seconds later. They went to work on Jennifer immediately, assessing her injuries, establishing an IV, preparing her for transport. It was bad, really bad. Broken jaw, fractured skull, internal bleeding. She was rushed to Cookville Regional Medical Center, lights and sirens all the way, with a trauma team standing by. What do you think about what you've seen so far? These men, these bikers that society often judges harshly, they risked everything to save a woman they'd never met. But the question remains, did they handle it the right way? Should they have waited for police? Should they have stayed out of it entirely? Share your thoughts in the comments. We want to know what you think. The scene outside Trailer 42 had become a circus of flashing lights and controlled chaos. 6 police cruisers, 2 ambulances, and a fire truck filled the small trailer park road. Residents had emerged from their homes, some filming on phones, others standing in small groups whispering and pointing. Sarah sat in Carlos's truck, wrapped in a blanket despite the summer heat, watching paramedics load her mother into an ambulance. She was silent now, her tears dried up, her face blank with shock. Carlos stayed with her, speaking softly, trying to provide comfort, while his own heart broke for this child who'd seen too much. The Brotherhood members stood in a line near their motorcycles, hands visible, complying with police instructions, while officers worked to piece together what had happened. This was the moment where everything could go very wrong for them. Tennessee had strict laws about trespassing and assault. Castle doctrine meant that Derek could potentially claim they'd invaded his home. They'd physically restrained Matthew. Tommy had entered the trailer without permission. On paper, depending on how the police wrote their reports and how prosecutors viewed the situation, the Brotherhood could face serious charges. Detective Sarah Chen arrived 18 minutes after the initial call. She was a 12-year veteran of the Cookville Police Department, assigned to their small but dedicated domestic violence unit. Chen had seen it all. She'd investigated hundreds of domestic violence cases, testified in dozens of trials, and held the hands of too many women who died from injuries their partners inflicted. She'd also seen how the system failed, how women dropped charges because they were scared, how abusers got probation and went right back to terrorizing their families, how children grew up learning that violence was normal. She was good at her job, but she was tired of the cycle, tired of the failures. Chen walked the scene methodically. She spoke with the first responding officers, reviewed the initial statements, examined the trailer's interior, and photographed the evidence. The blood on the carpet, the knife, the drug paraphernalia. Then she spoke with Derek and Matthew, both now sitting in separate patrol cars, both demanding lawyers, both claiming they were the victims of an assault by a violent biker gang. Their story was that they'd been relaxing at home when 12 armed men invaded their property and attacked them unprovoked. Jennifer had injured herself in a fall, they claimed. The bikers had made it worse by forcing entry and creating chaos. Chen had heard similar lies too many times to count. She moved on to the Brotherhood. She spoke with Bear first, letting him explain the sequence of events from the moment Sarah ran crying into the diner parking lot. Bear was articulate and precise. He'd given statements before, both as a Marine and later as a witness in other situations. He knew what information was relevant. He stuck to facts. He didn't embellish. He didn't try to make himself sound heroic. He simply explained what they'd seen, what they'd heard, and what actions they'd taken in response to a child's plea for help. Chen's expression remained neutral as she listened, but internally she was already forming conclusions. She'd seen Derek Thornton's record, 2 prior domestic violence complaints, both dropped when Jennifer declined to press charges, a long history of drug possession arrests, multiple parole violations. This wasn't a man defending his home from invaders. This was a man whose pattern of abuse had finally been interrupted by people brave enough or foolish enough to intervene. The question was whether the law would see it that way. She spoke with each Brotherhood member individually, noting that their stories aligned perfectly. Too perfectly, some might say, but Chen had been a detective long enough to know the difference between a rehearsed lie and multiple witnesses describing the same true event. Their accounts matched because they were accurate, not because they'd coordinated a cover story. Raymond played her the 911 call he'd made, still recorded on his phone. The timestamp and content corroborated everything they'd said. Other witnesses, neighbors who'd been outside, confirmed seeing Sarah run across the highway in distress, confirmed hearing the sounds of violence from Trailer 42, confirmed that the Brotherhood had arrived and entered only after the child's desperate plea. Tommy's arm required 12 stitches. The paramedics treated him on scene, documenting the injury caused by Derek's knife. That wound would become crucial evidence. It proved Derek had been armed. It proved he'd used violence against someone trying to render medical aid. It proved the Brotherhood hadn't been the aggressors. Chen photographed the injury from multiple angles and collected Tommy's bloody shirt as evidence. Then Chen did something that would prove to be decisive. She spoke with Sarah. Child witness interviews were delicate. They required special training and careful technique to avoid leading questions or traumatizing the child further. Chen had that training. She sat in Carlos's truck with Sarah, speaking gently, asking open-ended questions, letting the child tell her story in her own words and her own time. What Sarah described was horrific. Years of watching her mother beaten, living in fear, going hungry because money went to drugs instead of food, being screamed at and threatened. That terrible day, watching her mother being beaten so badly that Sarah was certain she would die if no one helped. "Did your mama tell you to run and get help?" Chen asked. Sarah nodded. "Mama always told me that if things got really bad, I should run and find someone safe. She said police or firefighters or sometimes people who look scary but aren't really scary. She said big tough guys sometimes have the biggest hearts, so when I saw the motorcycles I thought maybe those men could help. Was that okay? Did I do the right thing?" Chen felt her professional detachment crack slightly. "You did exactly the right thing," she told Sarah. "You saved your mama's life. You were so brave. Those men, they did the right thing too. They helped you when you needed it most. You don't need to worry about anything now. We're going to make sure you and your mama are safe." But making that promise and keeping it were two different things. Chen knew the reality. Even with overwhelming evidence, domestic violence prosecutions often fell apart. Victims recanted. Witnesses disappeared. Defense attorneys painted the abusers as victims. Juries bought into victim-blaming narratives, and in this case, there was an additional complication that would become apparent very quickly. Derek Thornton's family had connections. His uncle, Robert Thornton, was a former city councilman who still wielded significant political influence in Cookville. Robert's best friend from high school, still his regular golf partner, was the district attorney's chief deputy. Derek's cousin worked as an administrative assistant in the sheriff's department. These weren't people who could necessarily make charges disappear, but they were people who could apply pressure, who could shape narratives, who could make life difficult for anyone who pushed too hard against Derek. Within hours of Derek's arrest, those connections were being activated. Phone calls were made, lawyers were hired, a PR strategy was being formulated. The narrative they would push was simple. Derek was a troubled man, trying to get his life together, victimized by a gang of violent bikers who invaded his home. Jennifer was an unstable woman with a history of false accusations. The Brotherhood were dangerous vigilantes who'd taken the law into their own hands. By the time the local news covered the story that evening, that narrative was already taking shape. Thank you so much for staying with us until this point in the story. The commitment you've shown means everything, and trust me when I say the most shocking parts are still ahead. The legal battle that was about to unfold would test everything these men believed about justice and expose uncomfortable truths about how the system really works. Stay with us, because what happens next will leave you questioning everything. At the hospital, Jennifer regained consciousness 6 hours after the beating. She was confused, disoriented, and in tremendous pain. Detective Chen was waiting. She needed to get Jennifer's statement while it was fresh, before lawyers got involved, before fear made her recant like she had twice before. Chen sat beside Jennifer's hospital bed and asked her to describe what happened. Jennifer, medicated but lucid enough, told the truth. She described the years of abuse. She described that morning's attack. She described being certain she was about to die. And she described the incredible moment when she heard new voices, when she realized someone had come, when she understood that her daughter had found help. "Will they be in trouble?" Jennifer asked, her words slurred from the medication and broken jaw. "The men who helped Sarah, will they be arrested for helping us?" Chen chose her words carefully. "Right now, everyone involved is being investigated. The focus is on Derek and Matthew and what they did to you. But Jennifer, I need you to understand something. If you want to press charges, if you want to make sure Derek can't hurt you again, you need to follow through this time. No dropping charges, no going back to him. Can you do that?" Jennifer closed her swollen eyes. Tears leaked from the corners. "I'm so tired," she whispered. "So tired of being scared, so tired of pretending everything is okay, so tired of lying to protect him. Yes, I'll press charges, I'll testify, I'll do whatever it takes. Please make sure Sarah is safe. Please don't let him near her ever again." Chen squeezed Jennifer's hand gently. "That's what we're going to do. I promise you, we're going to do everything in our power to keep you both safe. But promises made in hospital rooms don't always survive contact with the criminal justice system." Within 24 hours of Derek's arrest, his family's influence became apparent. The local newspaper ran a story with the headline, "Motorcycle Gang Invades Local Home, Residents Injured." The article painted the Brotherhood as dangerous vigilantes. It quoted Derek's uncle describing his nephew as a young man struggling with addiction who was trying to turn his life around when violent outsiders invaded his home. It mentioned Jennifer's previous recantations as evidence of her instability and tendency to make false accusations. It said Sarah had been coached by the bikers to tell a fabricated story. The article went viral on local social media. The comments section became a battlefield. Some people defended the Brotherhood, calling them heroes who saved a woman's life. Others called them criminals who'd violated property rights and taken the law into their own hands. The debate grew heated, divisive, ugly. Death threats started arriving. Someone spray-painted "child killers" on Derek's uncle's car, assuming he was defending an abuser. Someone else left a dead rat on the doorstep of the motorcycle shop where Bear worked, with a note saying, "Vigilante trash." The situation was spiraling out of control. 3 days after the incident, charges were filed. Derek and Matthew were charged with aggravated domestic assault, child endangerment, and possession of methamphetamine with intent to distribute. Given the severity of Jennifer's injuries and the presence of a child in the home during the attack, these were serious felonies. Derek was held on $500,000 bail. Matthew on $250,000. Neither could make bail immediately, so both sat in county jail awaiting trial. But then the other shoe dropped. The district attorney's office announced that the Brotherhood members were also being charged. Bear, Tommy, Jake, and Wrench were charged with criminal trespassing and, in Tommy's case, assault for physically restraining Matthew. The charges were misdemeanors, not felonies, but they carried potential jail time and would result in criminal records. The message was clear. The system was treating the rescuers and the abusers as morally equivalent parties in a mutual altercation. The Brotherhood's lawyer, a Nashville-based civil rights attorney named Patricia Wells, who'd heard about the case and offered her services pro bono, was furious. "This is outrageous," she told reporters at a press conference. These men responded to a child's desperate cry for help. They saved a woman's life. They acted with remarkable restraint in an extremely dangerous situation. And now they're being prosecuted? This sends a terrible message to anyone who might intervene to stop violence. It tells people to look the other way, to let victims suffer, because helping might result in criminal charges. The case became a media sensation beyond Cookville. National news outlets picked up the story. Cable news panels debated it endlessly. Civil liberties groups rallied behind the Brotherhood. Domestic violence advocacy organizations held press conferences supporting them. Veteran groups pointed out that Bear and several others had served their country honorably and were now being persecuted for living up to the same values of protecting the innocent that they'd sworn to uphold in uniform. But Derek's family fought back. They hired a high-profile criminal defense attorney from Nashville who specialized in media-friendly cases. They gave interviews painting Derek as the real victim. They produced character witnesses who claimed Jennifer was a liar and a drug user herself, though no evidence supported these claims. They suggested the Brotherhood had planted the methamphetamine found in the trailer, despite forensic evidence showing it had been there for weeks. They filed a civil lawsuit against the Brotherhood for $5 million, claiming emotional distress, violation of civil rights, and assault. The legal battles dragged on for months. Bear and the Brotherhood faced mounting legal bills, despite their attorney working pro bono. There were court appearances, depositions, endless procedural motions. The stress affected everyone. Bear lost his job at the motorcycle shop after his boss, facing pressure from customers who believed the propaganda about the Brotherhood being a criminal gang, reluctantly let him go. Tommy's social work license was suspended pending the outcome of the criminal charges. Jake and Wrench faced harassment at their workplaces. Carlos received threatening letters at his school. The Brotherhood, men who'd done nothing wrong except try to save a life, were being destroyed by the very system they'd tried to help. Meanwhile, Jennifer and Sarah lived in a domestic violence shelter in Nashville, relocated there for their safety. Jennifer was healing physically, though the doctor said some damage would be permanent. Her jaw had been wired shut for 6 weeks. She'd lost hearing in her left ear. She had scarring that no amount of surgery could fully erase, but the psychological damage was worse. She had nightmares every night. She jumped at sudden sounds. She couldn't trust anyone easily, and she carried tremendous guilt about what was happening to the men who'd saved her life. Sarah was in therapy, working through trauma that would take years to process. She blamed herself for getting the bikers in trouble. She'd saved her mother's life, but at what cost to the men who'd helped them? A child shouldn't have to carry that weight, but she did. Her therapist worked with her constantly, trying to help her understand that none of this was her fault, that she'd been incredibly brave, that sometimes doing the right thing comes with hard consequences, but that doesn't make it any less right. The preliminary hearings approached. Both cases, the prosecution of Derek and Matthew and the prosecution of the Brotherhood, would be heard by the same judge. Judge Harold Mitchell, no relation to Jennifer, was a conservative jurist with a reputation for strict interpretation of the law. He didn't care about public opinion or media pressure. He cared about facts and legal precedent. The question was whether the facts would be enough. Detective Chen had worked tirelessly to build an airtight case. She'd collected statements from every witness. She'd documented every piece of physical evidence. She'd obtained security footage from the diner showing Sarah running across the highway in distress. She'd gotten phone records showing Raymond's 911 call occurred before the Brotherhood entered the property, establishing that they'd notified authorities before taking action. She'd interviewed neighbors who described years of hearing violence from Trailer 42, establishing a pattern of abuse. She'd obtained medical records documenting Jennifer's previous injuries that matched her claims of long-term domestic violence. But she'd also hit roadblocks. 2 witnesses who'd initially agreed to testify about seeing Derek's violence over the years suddenly refused to cooperate, claiming they'd been mistaken or didn't want to get involved. Derek's defense team had successfully suppressed some evidence on technicality grounds, and most concerning, rumors were circulating that the district attorney's office was considering a plea deal for Derek that would involve minimal jail time in exchange for dropping the civil lawsuit against the Brotherhood. The preliminary hearing for the Brotherhood's charges came first. The courtroom was packed. Domestic violence survivors filled the gallery, wearing purple ribbons in solidarity with Jennifer and in support of the Brotherhood. Veteran organizations sent representatives. Members of other motorcycle clubs from across Tennessee came to support their brothers. The media presence was overwhelming, with cameras from national news networks positioned outside since cameras weren't allowed in the courtroom. Patricia Wells, the Brotherhood's attorney, presented a clear and compelling argument. Her clients had responded to a child's desperate plea for help. They'd witnessed a life-threatening emergency. Tennessee law, specifically the Defense of Others statute, permitted reasonable force to protect a third party from imminent serious bodily injury or death. The Brotherhood had used minimal force, restraining only those who presented an immediate threat and had immediately contacted emergency services. They'd acted not as vigilantes seeking to punish Derek, but as good Samaritans trying to save Jennifer's life until professional help could arrive. The prosecution argued that the Brotherhood had no right to enter private property, that they should have waited for police, that their actions constituted vigilantism, regardless of their intention. The prosecutor pointed out that Tennessee's Defense of Others statute required that the person using force reasonably believe intervention was immediately necessary. Could the Brotherhood really claim they believed Jennifer's life was in immediate danger when they couldn't see her from outside the trailer? Couldn't they have simply secured the perimeter and waited for the police who were already on their way? Judge Mitchell listened to both sides, asked pointed questions, and took a brief recess to review the case law. When he returned, his ruling was measured and thoughtful. He acknowledged that the Brotherhood had faced an impossible situation with no clear right answer. He noted that the 911 call demonstrated they'd tried to involve authorities appropriately. He observed that the severity of Jennifer's injuries and her subsequent medical expert testimony that she would have died without immediate intervention supported the Brotherhood's claim that this was a life-threatening emergency. He also noted that Tommy's injury from Derek's knife attack proved the Brotherhood members were defending themselves and others from an armed assailant. The judge dismissed all charges against Bear, Jake, and Wrench. However, he let the trespassing charge against Tommy stand, ruling that while Tommy's intention to provide medical aid was commendable, entering the trailer without consent before police arrived was still technically illegal, even if morally justified. The charge was reduced to a violation, essentially a ticket, with a small fine and no jail time, and no permanent criminal record. It was a compromise, a judicial acknowledgement that the law and justice don't always align perfectly. The courtroom erupted in applause, quickly silenced by the judge's gavel. Outside, the Brotherhood members faced a wall of cameras and reporters. Bear spoke briefly. "We didn't do anything heroic. We did what any decent person should do when a child asks for help. We're grateful the judge saw the truth of what happened. Now we just want Jennifer and Sarah to get the justice they deserve and the safety they need. That's what matters here, not us." But the case against Derek and Matthew was far from over, and the civil lawsuit Derek's family had filed was still pending, seeking millions in damages that could financially destroy the Brotherhood members for the rest of their lives. The battle was far from finished. Jennifer Mitchell sat in a conference room at the district attorney's office, her hands trembling as she stared at the document in front of her. 6 months had passed since that terrible June day. 6 months of healing, therapy, legal proceedings, and fear. The physical wounds had mostly healed, the psychological ones never would, not completely. Across the table sat Detective Chen, Patricia Wells, and an assistant district attorney named Marcus Freeman. Freeman was the one who'd called this meeting, and what he had to say made Jennifer feel sick. "We're offering Derek a plea deal," Freeman explained, his tone businesslike and detached. "He'll plead guilty to aggravated assault and serve 18 months in county jail with credit for time served. The drug charges will be dropped. The child endangerment charges will be dropped. In exchange, his family will drop the civil lawsuit against the Brotherhood." Jennifer stared at him in disbelief. 18 months? He nearly killed me. He terrorized me for 3 years. He traumatized my daughter. And he gets 18 months? Freeman shifted uncomfortably. "Mrs. Mitchell, I understand your frustration, but you need to understand the realities we're facing. Derek's family has resources. They've hired excellent attorneys who've filed numerous motions challenging our evidence. They're claiming the drug charges won't stick because the Brotherhood members contaminated the scene. They're arguing the meth could have been planted. They're suggesting you have a history of false accusations based on your previous recantations. None of that is true, and we can probably win at trial. But trials are expensive, time-consuming, and unpredictable. Juries can be swayed by expensive defense attorneys. If we go to trial and lose, Derek walks free completely. This plea guarantees he serves time and gets a felony conviction on his record." Jennifer felt tears of rage and frustration burning her eyes. "What about Matthew? What about his brother who helped beat me unconscious?" "Matthew took a separate deal," Freeman admitted. 6 months jail time, probation, and mandatory drug treatment. He had no prior record, and his attorney successfully argued he was under Derek's influence and high on drugs during the incident. "This is unbelievable," Patricia Wells interjected, her voice sharp with anger. "These men nearly murdered Jennifer in front of her child, and they're getting combined sentences of less than 2 years. Meanwhile, the men who saved Jennifer's life faced criminal charges just for trying to help. Do you see the injustice here?" Freeman held up his hands defensively. "I'm not happy about it either, but I have to consider the interests of all victims, including the Brotherhood members who are facing financial ruin from this civil lawsuit. Derek's family is willing to drop that lawsuit entirely as part of this deal. That's worth something. They should drop it anyway," Wells shot back. "It's a frivolous lawsuit designed to intimidate people from helping domestic violence victims. It's morally bankrupt, perhaps," Freeman agreed, "but it's still a real legal threat that could cost the Brotherhood members their homes, their savings, everything they have. This deal makes that threat go away." Jennifer looked at Detective Chen, seeking guidance. Chen's expression was carefully neutral, but her eyes betrayed her disgust with the situation. She'd seen this play out too many times. Victims pressured to accept inadequate plea deals. Abusers getting light sentences because they had resources and connections, a system that talked about protecting victims, but often failed them when it mattered most. "What do you think I should do?" Jennifer asked Chen quietly. Chen chose her words carefully. "Legally, I can't advise you. That's up to you, your attorney, and the prosecutors. But personally, I think you need to consider what outcome you can live with. Going to trial means months more of this hanging over you. It means testifying in detail about years of abuse. It means Derek's attorneys cross-examining you, trying to make you look unstable or dishonest. It means Sarah might have to testify about what she saw. It means reliving all of this publicly, in detail, for strangers to judge. And at the end of all that, there's still a chance Derek could be acquitted on some charges, and you'd have gone through all that pain for nothing. But if I accept this deal," Jennifer said, her voice breaking, "I'm saying that what he did to me, what he did to Sarah, is only worth 18 months. I'm saying his family's money and connections matter more than justice. I'm saying victims don't matter as much as avoiding difficult trials." "No," Wells said firmly. "You're saying you're choosing to prioritize your healing and your daughter's well-being over revenge. You're saying you're strong enough to accept an imperfect outcome if it means moving forward with your life. You're saying that protecting the men who saved you from financial destruction is important to you. None of those things are wrong, Jennifer. None of them make you weak. Jennifer sat in silence for a long moment. She thought about Bear and Tommy and the others who'd risked everything to help her. She thought about Sarah, who still had nightmares, who still blamed herself for getting the bikers in trouble. She thought about the months of therapy ahead, the process of rebuilding her life, finding a job, creating stability for her daughter. Could she really endure months more of legal proceedings? Could she really put Sarah through testifying? Could she really watch Derek's expensive lawyers try to destroy her credibility in front of a jury? "I'll accept the deal," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I want to make a victim impact statement at his sentencing. I want him to hear what he did to us. I want it on the record. And I want a restraining order that keeps him away from me and Sarah for the rest of his life. All of that can be arranged," Freeman assured her. "And for what it's worth, Mrs. Mitchell, I'm sorry. I'm sorry the system didn't protect you better. I'm sorry we can't give you the justice you deserve. I'm sorry this is the best we can offer." Jennifer nodded numbly. She signed the documents. The deal was done. Derek Thornton, who terrorized his family for years and nearly beaten his girlfriend to death in front of their daughter, would serve 18 months in county jail. Matthew would serve 6. And in less than 2 years, both men would be free, while Jennifer and Sarah would spend the rest of their lives dealing with the trauma they'd inflicted. The news of the plea deal sparked outrage among the domestic violence advocacy community. Protest letters flooded the district attorney's office. Survivors groups held rallies demanding better prosecution of abusers. The media coverage reignited debates about how the justice system handles domestic violence cases, about the role of money and connections in determining outcomes, about whether the system truly protects victims or just processes paperwork. But for the Brotherhood, the news was more complicated. On one hand, the civil lawsuit that had threatened their financial futures was gone. Derek's family, as promised, dropped all civil claims. The immediate threat of losing their homes and savings disappeared. On the other hand, the outcome felt hollow. They'd risked everything to save Jennifer's life, and her abuser was getting 18 months in county jail, where he'd likely serve even less with good behavior and overcrowding considerations. Was that really justice? Bear wrestled with these questions constantly. He'd seen combat. He'd seen real evil. He'd made peace with the fact that the world wasn't always fair. But this felt different. This wasn't distant geopolitical conflicts or abstract ethical dilemmas. This was a woman and child they'd personally saved, and the system had failed them. He found himself questioning whether they'd done the right thing by intervening. Not morally. He knew they'd done the morally right thing. But practically. They'd saved Jennifer's life, but they'd also pulled her into a legal nightmare. They'd protected Sarah, but now the child carried guilt about the trouble her rescuers had faced. Had they really helped, or had they just complicated an already tragic situation? Tommy, drawing on his social work background, tried to provide perspective. "We did what we had to do in the moment. We saved a life. That's not nothing, Bear. Jennifer is alive because of us. Sarah still has her mother because of us. The legal outcome sucks. The system failed, but that's not on us. We didn't create a system that lets abusers with money and connections get light sentences. We didn't create a system that makes victims choose between justice and their own well-being. We just responded to a child who needed help. That was right then, and it's right now, regardless of what happened after." The weeks leading up to Derek's sentencing were tense. The media attention had died down somewhat, but local interest remained high. Domestic violence survivors planned to pack the courtroom to support Jennifer and send a message that abuse wouldn't be tolerated, even if the legal system gave inadequate sentences. Derek's family planned their own show of support, trying to paint him as a victim of circumstances and addiction who deserved sympathy rather than condemnation. Jennifer prepared her victim impact statement with help from her therapist and Patricia Wells. She wrote and rewrote it dozens of times, trying to find words adequate to describe 3 years of terror, pain, and survival. How do you summarize that much trauma in a few minutes of court testimony? How do you make a judge and a room full of strangers understand what it's like to live in constant fear, to sleep with one eye open, to teach your daughter survival skills she should never need? The sentencing hearing took place on a cold December morning, 6 months after the incident. The courtroom was indeed packed. One side filled with supporters of Jennifer, wearing purple ribbons and holding signs with messages like, "Survivors deserve justice and 18 months is not enough." The other side, much smaller, consisted of Derek's family members, looking uncomfortable but determined to stand by him. Derek was brought in wearing an orange jail jumpsuit, shackled at the wrists and ankles. He looked smaller than Jennifer remembered, diminished somehow. 6 months in jail had changed him. He'd lost weight. His face looked gaunt. His eyes, once full of rage and violence, now looked defeated. For just a moment, Jennifer almost felt pity for him. Almost. Then she remembered his fists. She remembered his boots kicking her while she lay helpless. She remembered Sarah's screams. The pity evaporated. Judge Mitchell, the same judge who dismissed most charges against the Brotherhood, presided over the sentencing. He'd reviewed all the evidence, all the statements, all the legal arguments. He asked if Jennifer wished to make a victim impact statement. She stood, her legs shaking, and walked to the podium. She'd practiced this statement dozens of times, but now, facing Derek for the first time since that terrible day, the words caught in her throat. She looked at her notes, took a deep breath, and began to speak. "For 3 years, I lived in hell. For 3 years, I went to sleep not knowing if I'd wake up. For 3 years, I taught my daughter how to hide, how to be quiet, how to survive. Derek Thornton didn't just hit me. He destroyed who I was. He took a young woman with dreams and ambitions and turned her into someone who could barely function, who jumped at shadows, who believed she deserved the abuse because she'd been told so many times that she was worthless, stupid, ugly, useless. He made me believe I had nowhere to go, no one who would help me, no future beyond surviving one more day. He isolated me from friends and family. He controlled every dollar I earned. He monitored my every movement. And when I didn't perform to his impossible standards, when I spoke up, when I showed any hint of independence, he hurt me. He hurt me in ways that left scars you can see and scars you can't. But the worst part, the absolutely unforgivable part, was what he did to Sarah. My daughter watched her mother being beaten unconscious. My daughter ran desperately into traffic looking for help because she thought I was dying. My daughter, at 8 years old, believed it was her responsibility to save her mother's life. No child should carry that burden. No child should see what she saw. No child should grow up learning that love means violence, that family means fear, that home is the most dangerous place in the world. Derek Thornton took 3 years of my life. He took my daughter's innocence. He took my sense of safety and security that I'll never fully get back. And the system is giving him 18 months. 18 months for 3 years of torture. 18 months for nearly killing me in front of our child. That's 6 months for every year he destroyed. That's the message we're sending to victims. Your suffering isn't worth much. That's the message we're sending to abusers. You can terrorize your family for years and get a sentence measured in months, not decades. Jennifer paused, looking directly at Derek for the first time. He was crying. Whether from genuine remorse or self-pity, she couldn't tell and didn't care. "I want you to know that you didn't win. You didn't break me. Even though you tried, I'm still here. Sarah is still here. We're getting help. We're healing. We're building a new life without you. You took years from us, but you don't get to take our future. Sarah survived you. And we're going to do more than survive. We're going to live, really live, something you never let us do." She turned to Judge Mitchell. "Your Honor, I accepted this plea deal not because I think it's just, but because I need to move forward. I need to focus on healing, not revenge. But I want it on the record that this sentence is inadequate. I want future victims to know that the system might fail them too, so they need to be their own advocates. I want abusers to know that even if the legal consequences are light, their victims will survive and thrive without them. And I want to thank the men who saved my life, the Brotherhood Motorcycle Club members who responded to my daughter's cry for help. They faced criminal charges for doing the right thing. They faced a frivolous lawsuit for being good Samaritans. They risked everything to save a stranger. Those men are heroes. Derek Thornton is not a victim. He's an abuser who got off easy. Thank you." Jennifer returned to her seat, shaking but feeling lighter somehow. She'd said what needed to be said. The courtroom sat in stunned silence. Even Derek's family members looked uncomfortable, unable to meet anyone's eyes. Judge Mitchell waited a long moment before speaking. "Mr. Thornton," he said, his voice cold and formal, "I've been a judge for 23 years. I've sentenced hundreds of defendants. I've heard every excuse, every justification, every sob story. Your attorney wants me to consider your difficult childhood, your struggles with addiction, your desire to turn your life around. Those factors have been considered in the plea agreement you've already received, an agreement that I frankly find disturbingly lenient, given the severity of your crimes. You terrorized this woman for years. You nearly killed her in front of your child. And due to various legal and practical considerations, you're receiving a sentence that doesn't begin to reflect the harm you've caused. I want to be clear. I'm bound by the plea agreement. I cannot exceed the sentence agreed upon by the prosecution and your attorney. But I can tell you this. If you violate your probation, if you come within 500 yards of Jennifer or Sarah Mitchell, if you so much as send them a message through a third party, I will revoke your probation and ensure you serve the maximum sentence possible for any violation. You will stay away from these people for the rest of your life. Do you understand me?" Derek nodded, still crying. "Yes, Your Honor." The sentence was entered. 18 months in county jail, with credit for the 6 months already served. 3 years of supervised probation after release, mandatory drug treatment, mandatory anger management, a permanent restraining order keeping him at least 500 yards from Jennifer and Sarah at all times. It was done. Derek was led out of the courtroom in shackles. Jennifer watched him go, feeling nothing, not relief, not satisfaction, not closure. Just a dull acknowledgement that this chapter at least was over. Outside the courthouse, the Brotherhood members waited. They'd attended the hearing, sitting in the back row, present, but not drawing attention to themselves. When Jennifer emerged, Bear approached her carefully. "How are you holding up?" he asked quietly. Jennifer looked at these men who'd risked everything for her. "I don't know how to thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "You saved my life. You saved Sarah. And you paid a price for that. I'm so sorry you had to go through all of this." Bear shook his head. "Don't apologize. We'd do it again tomorrow. We'd do it 100 more times. That's not something you need to feel guilty about. You focus on you and Sarah. You focus on building that new life. That's what matters." Jennifer hugged him. Then Tommy. Then each of the Brotherhood members who'd been there that day. Sarah stood beside her mother, shy but wanting to say something. She approached Bear, looking up at this huge, intimidating man who'd answered her desperate plea. "Thank you for helping my mama," she said simply. "You're the bravest people I ever met." Bear knelt down to her level, just as Tommy had that day in the parking lot. "You're the brave one, kiddo. You ran for help when it mattered most. You saved your mama's life just as much as we did. Don't ever forget that." The media captured these moments, these images of hardened bikers embracing a domestic violence survivor and her daughter. The photos would go viral, would be shared millions of times. would become symbols of an unlikely bond forged in crisis and maintained through adversity. But for the people actually involved, it wasn't about symbols or media narratives. It was about human connection, about people helping people, about doing what's right even when it's hard. In the weeks and months that followed Derek's sentencing, the story began to fade from public attention. The media moved on to other scandals and tragedies. The protesters found new causes. Life returned to some version of normal, though normal had been permanently redefined for everyone involved. Jennifer and Sarah remained in Nashville, living in transitional housing provided by a domestic violence organization. Jennifer found work at a local library, a quiet job that didn't require her to interact with many people while she continued healing. Sarah thrived in a new school where no one knew her history, where she could just be a kid without carrying the weight of what she'd survived. The Brotherhood returned to their regular activities. They continued their charity rides, their fundraising for shelters and hospitals, their quiet work helping people who needed it. But something had changed. Word spread about what they'd done. Other domestic violence survivors reached out, asking for help escaping dangerous situations. Other children living in fear contacted them through social media. The Brotherhood found themselves becoming an unofficial rapid response network for people in crisis, people who didn't trust the official channels or needed help immediately. Bear, Tommy and the others knew they were walking a legal tightrope. They couldn't keep breaking into homes or physically restraining people, no matter how justified it might seem. They had to work within the system, had to coordinate with law enforcement and social services. So they adapted. They developed protocols. They established relationships with domestic violence shelters, with police departments, with legal aid organizations. They created a network that could respond quickly but legally to crisis situations. Tommy used his social work background to train other Brotherhood members in de-escalation techniques, in how to assess danger, in how to provide support without overstepping legal boundaries. They created a hotline that people could call for help, staffed by volunteers who knew how to connect callers with appropriate resources. They worked with lawyers to understand exactly what they could and couldn't do. They became, in essence, a bridge between people in crisis and the official systems that were supposed to help them, but often moved too slowly or failed entirely. Detective Chen, impressed by their commitment and organization, became an informal advisor. She helped them understand police procedures, explained what kind of evidence was needed to build strong cases against abusers, taught them how to document situations properly so their interventions would hold up in court. She saw in the Brotherhood what she'd always wanted the system to be: responsive, effective, and truly focused on protecting victims rather than just processing cases. Over the next 3 years, the Brotherhood's network expanded to cover 6 states. They answered over 200 calls for help. They helped victims escape dangerous situations, connected them with shelters and resources, provided security during custody exchanges and restraining order violations, and documented evidence for police investigation. They never used excessive force. They never entered properties without proper cause or coordination with law enforcement. They learned from that first crisis with Jennifer and Sarah, refining their approach to maximize help while minimizing legal risk. They weren't perfect. There were situations that didn't go as planned. There were times when they arrived too late. There were victims who returned to their abusers despite the Brotherhood's best efforts. But they helped far more than they failed. And most importantly, they proved that ordinary people, even those society often judged harshly based on appearance, could make extraordinary differences in the lives of those who desperately needed help. Derek Thornton served his full 18-month sentence with no early release for good behavior due to disciplinary issues in jail. Upon release, he was required to check in weekly with a probation officer, attend mandatory drug treatment and anger management classes, and maintain employment. He violated the terms of his restraining order 6 months after release, attempting to contact Jennifer through Facebook. He was immediately arrested, his probation was revoked, and he was sent back to jail for the maximum remaining sentence. He would serve an additional 2 years before being released again, older and perhaps wiser. Whether he'd truly changed or simply learned to hide his true nature better remained to be seen. Matthew Thornton completed his 6-month sentence and mandatory drug treatment. He moved to Kentucky to live with relatives and, by all accounts, managed to stay clean and out of trouble. He sent a letter to Jennifer 2 years after the incident, apologizing for his role in her abuse and the trauma inflicted on Sarah. The letter was forwarded through Jennifer's attorney. She read it once and put it away. She didn't respond. Some apologies, no matter how sincere, don't require acknowledgement. Some wounds don't need closure, just distance. The civil lawsuit that had threatened the Brotherhood was indeed dropped as part of Derek's plea deal. But the emotional and financial toll of those months defending against criminal charges and the lawsuit left scars. Bear had lost his job and struggled to find new employment, with potential employers Googling his name and finding articles about the case. Tommy's social work license was eventually reinstated, but the suspension had cost him months of income and professional credibility. Jake and Wrench had exhausted savings paying for lawyers. Carlos faced harassment at his school until the administration finally stepped in to protect him. But they all agreed, in quiet conversations over beers or coffee, that they'd do it again. They'd make the same choice. They'd respond to that child's cry for help, knowing everything that would follow. Because some things matter more than convenience or safety or financial security. Some things demand a response, even when the cost is high. That's what separates those who talk about doing the right thing from those who actually do it when the moment arrives. 3 years after that June day in Cookeville, Sarah Mitchell, now 11 years old, stood on a stage in Nashville's Municipal Auditorium. The occasion was the Tennessee Coalition Against Domestic Violence's annual awareness rally, an event that drew over 5,000 people, including survivors, advocates, legislators, and law enforcement. Sarah wore a purple dress, her mother's hand held tightly in her own as she approached the microphone. Public speaking terrified her, but she'd asked to do this. She had something to say, and people needed to hear it. "My name is Sarah Mitchell," she began, her young voice amplified through speakers that carried her words to every corner of the auditorium. "When I was 8 years old, I watched my mama get beaten almost to death. I ran across a highway and found some bikers at a diner. I asked them to help. They did. They saved my mama's life, and then they got in trouble for it. The audience, which had been murmuring quietly, went silent. This was the girl from that case, the viral story that had sparked national debates about Good Samaritan laws and domestic violence intervention. She'd become a symbol, but she was also just a child dealing with unimaginable trauma. Now she was speaking publicly for the first time about what happened. "I used to think it was my fault that those men got in trouble," Sarah continued, her confidence growing as she spoke. "I thought I shouldn't have asked for help. I thought I should have handled it differently. But my therapist helped me understand something. Those men, the Brotherhood, they didn't get in trouble because I asked for help. They got in trouble because our system punishes people who do the right thing when it's not convenient or easy or simple. They got in trouble because helping someone in danger shouldn't require a law degree to figure out if you're going to get arrested for it." Applause rippled through the auditorium. Sarah waited for it to quiet before continuing. "My mama is alive because those bikers didn't worry about getting in trouble. They worried about saving a life. They didn't care that we were strangers. They didn't care that helping us might cost them everything. They cared that a little girl was asking for help and someone needed to answer." She paused, looking out at the sea of faces. Those men wore leather jackets and had tattoos and looked scary, but they were the angels who saved us. They were angels who wore leather instead of wings. The phrase would be quoted endlessly in the days and weeks that followed. It would appear on T-shirts and bumper stickers. It would trend on social media. But in that moment it was simply a child's honest description of her experience, her attempt to honor the men who'd answered her desperate plea. "They taught me that heroes don't always look like heroes in movies," Sarah said. "Sometimes they look like regular people who just decide to help when help is needed. And they taught me that doing the right thing isn't always easy, but it's always worth it." Sarah finished her speech to a standing ovation that lasted over 2 minutes. Jennifer joined her on stage, wrapping her arms around her daughter, both of them crying tears that were equal parts pain, gratitude, and hope. In the audience, Bear and the Brotherhood stood and applauded along with everyone else. They'd been given places of honor at the event, recognized officially as the catalyst for important conversations about domestic violence intervention and Good Samaritan protection. But they were uncomfortable with the attention, preferred to stay in the background, let the survivors and advocates take center stage. After the rally, a reception was held for speakers and special guests. Jennifer sought out Bear, finding him trying unsuccessfully to hide in a corner away from the crowd. She'd stayed in touch with the Brotherhood over the years, updating them on her and Sarah's progress, thanking them repeatedly for saving their lives. But this moment felt different, more significant somehow. "I have something to tell you," Jennifer said. Bear turned, giving her his full attention. "A few months ago, I finished my degree. I went back to Tennessee State and completed my bachelor's in education. I start teaching elementary school this fall, 3rd grade. It's what I always wanted to do before everything happened with Derek, before my life got derailed. You gave me my life back. You gave me a chance to become who I was supposed to be. I wanted you to know that." Bear's eyes, these hard eyes that had seen combat and violence and human cruelty, filled with tears, he quickly blinked away. "That's all we ever wanted," he said quietly, "to give you and Sarah a chance. That's all any of us wanted. Congratulations. You earned that degree. You fought for it. We just gave you a fighting chance." Patricia Wells, the attorney who'd defended the Brotherhood, had also become an advocate for changing Tennessee's laws around domestic violence intervention. She drafted proposed legislation creating explicit legal protections for people who intervene in good faith to prevent serious bodily harm. The Sarah Mitchell Act, as it was being called, would clarify that citizens who respond to emergency situations involving domestic violence would be protected from criminal prosecution if they act reasonably and notify authorities as soon as possible. The bill was working its way through the state legislature with bipartisan support. "We've got Republican legislators who care about Second Amendment rights and self-defense supporting this bill," Wells explained to reporters after the rally. "We've got Democratic legislators who care about domestic violence prevention supporting it. We've got law enforcement supporting it because they want civilians to call for help and intervene safely when someone's life is at risk. This shouldn't be partisan. This shouldn't be controversial. People who save lives in good faith shouldn't face prosecution. It's that simple." The bill would pass the Tennessee legislature 8 months later, signed into law by the governor in a ceremony attended by Jennifer, Sarah, and the Brotherhood. It wasn't perfect. It didn't solve all the problems with how the justice system handles domestic violence, but it was progress. It was acknowledgement that the law needed to support, not punish, those who answered desperate calls for help. Other states began drafting similar legislation. The ripple effects of that June day continued spreading. Detective Chen had also been changed by the case. She'd always been dedicated to her work, but the Jennifer Mitchell case had shown her both the worst and best of humanity. The worst in Derek's violence and the system's inadequate response, the best in the Brotherhood's selfless intervention and Jennifer's incredible resilience. Chen had been promoted to lead the domestic violence unit, and she used her increased authority to implement changes. She established better protocols for working with civilian witnesses and helpers. She created partnerships with community organizations, including the Brotherhood's network, to respond more effectively to crisis situations. She fought for resources to support victims and prosecute abusers more aggressively. She'd also stayed in touch with Jennifer and Sarah, watching their healing journey with quiet satisfaction. Chen had entered law enforcement to help people, to protect the vulnerable, to seek justice. Too often, the job involved paperwork and politics and compromises that left her feeling like she'd failed. But every time she saw Jennifer thriving, saw Sarah growing into a confident young woman, saw the Brotherhood helping another family escape danger, she was reminded why she'd chosen this career. Some cases made a difference. Some victories, even imperfect ones, mattered deeply. The Brotherhood itself had transformed. What started as a small motorcycle club focused on charity rides had become a nationally recognized network for domestic violence intervention. They'd formalized their structure, created training programs, established partnerships with professional organizations, and developed strict protocols for responding to crisis calls. They'd helped over 400 families in 6 states, saved dozens of lives, and connected hundreds of victims with resources and support. They'd also inspired others. Motorcycle clubs across the country reached out, wanting to replicate their model. Veterans organizations asked for guidance on how to create similar rapid response networks. Community groups sought their expertise on domestic violence intervention. The Brotherhood, these men who society had once viewed as dangerous outcasts, had become leaders in a movement to protect the vulnerable and hold abusers accountable. Bear had found new employment working with a non-profit that provided security and transportation services for domestic violence survivors. His military background, his experience with crisis intervention, and his media profile made him an ideal advocate and spokesman. He spoke at conferences, trained volunteers, and continued riding with his brothers on weekends. He'd found purpose again, a mission that mattered, work that saved lives and changed trajectories. Tommy had returned to social work, but in a different capacity. He worked for the same non-profit as Bear, coordinating their rapid response network, training volunteers in de-escalation and crisis intervention, and managing relationships with law enforcement and shelters. His suspension had actually opened doors, made him a more effective advocate because he understood personally what it meant to face consequences for doing the right thing. He wore his scars, both physical and emotional, as badges of honor. The scar on his arm from Derek's knife served as a constant reminder of why this work mattered. Jake, Wrench, Carlos, Raymond, and the other Brotherhood members continued their regular lives and jobs, but with an added purpose. They responded to calls when needed. They rode in memorial services for domestic violence victims. They raised funds for shelters and legal services. They mentored younger men, teaching them that true strength meant protecting others, not dominating them. They'd become, in their own quiet way, instruments of change in communities across multiple states. Jennifer and Sarah's healing continued. Jennifer not only completed her degree but excelled in her teaching career. She specialized in working with children from troubled homes, using her own experience to recognize signs of abuse and intervene early. She became a mandatory reporter who actually reported, who actually followed through, who actually made sure children got help even when it was difficult or uncomfortable. Her classroom was a safe haven where kids could be kids, where trauma didn't define them, where hope was nurtured and possibilities were real. Sarah thrived in middle school, a bright student with plans to become either a teacher like her mother or a social worker like Tommy. She'd started a peer support group for kids dealing with family violence, creating a space where young people could share their experiences without judgment. She volunteered at the domestic violence shelter where she and her mother had once lived, reading to younger children and showing them that survival was possible, that better days could come. She'd transformed her trauma into purpose, her pain into compassion, her suffering into strength. 3 years after that June day, on the anniversary of the incident, the Brotherhood organized a ride to benefit domestic violence services in Middle Tennessee. Over 300 motorcycles participated, riders coming from across the region to honor Jennifer and Sarah and all survivors of domestic violence. The ride ended at the same diner where Sarah had first found the Brotherhood, Rusty's in Cookville. The parking lot that had been the site of a desperate plea for help was now filled with bikes, riders, and supporters celebrating survival and resilience. Jennifer and Sarah were the guests of honor. They stood on a small platform as the riders circled the parking lot, engines roaring in a thunderous salute. When the noise finally faded and the riders parked their bikes, Bear approached the platform with a presentation. On behalf of the Brotherhood of the Road and all the organizations we've partnered with over these years, he said, his voice carrying across the crowd, we want to present Jennifer and Sarah Mitchell with the Courage Award, recognizing their bravery in surviving, in speaking out, and in helping others find their own path to safety and healing. He handed Jennifer a plaque, a simple piece of wood with an engraved message. To Jennifer and Sarah Mitchell. Your courage inspired a movement. Your strength changed laws. Your voices saved lives. You are the true heroes of this story. Jennifer accepted it with tears streaming down her face, unable to speak for a moment. When she found her voice, she said simply, you saved us. And now we're all saving others together. That's how it should be. That's how we break the cycle. By helping each other, by refusing to look away, by being brave enough to answer when someone calls for help. The event raised over $75,000 for domestic violence services. It brought together survivors, advocates, law enforcement, legislators, and community members in a powerful demonstration of what's possible when people decide to care, to act, to make a difference. The Brotherhood had gone from answering one child's desperate plea to creating a movement that had helped hundreds of families and changed laws in multiple states. And it all started with a simple decision to help someone in need, regardless of the cost. As the sun set over Cookville that evening, Jennifer and Sarah stood with Bear and the Brotherhood, watching the riders prepare for the journey home. Sarah, now taller and more confident than the terrified 8-year-old who'd run across this very highway 3 years ago, looked up at Bear. Do you think we really made a difference? She asked. Do you think all of this actually changed anything? Bear knelt down, just like he had that first day, bringing himself to her level. He pointed to the crowd of people, survivors wearing purple ribbons, advocates carrying signs, riders preparing to return home and continue this work in their own communities. Every single person here has been touched by your story, he said. Every single one of them knows now that they can make a difference, that they should make a difference. That looking away isn't an option when someone needs help. You and your mama didn't just survive. You didn't just heal. You changed how people think about this issue. You made it impossible for people to ignore. That's a difference that will echo for years, for generations maybe. So yeah, kiddo, you made a difference, a huge one. Sarah smiled, a genuine smile of a child who'd survived hell and come out the other side stronger. Then she looked at the diner, at the parking lot, at the highway where she'd run in terror 3 years ago. She remembered that moment. The fear, the desperation, the certainty that her mother was dying. She remembered seeing these bikes and making a choice to trust strangers who looked scary but might have big hearts. She remembered being right about that trust. I'm glad I ran to you that day, she said quietly. I'm glad you were here. I'm glad you helped us. Bear put a massive hand gently on her shoulder. We're glad we were here too. We're glad we could help, and we're glad you were brave enough to run, to ask, to trust us with something so important. You saved your mama just as much as we did. Don't ever forget that. The anniversary ride became an annual event. Each year more riders participated. Each year more funds were raised. Each year more survivors shared their story. And each year Jennifer and Sarah stood in that parking lot, living proof that survival was possible, that healing was real, that hope could emerge from the darkest experiences. They became symbols, yes, But more importantly, they became advocates, educators, and inspirations to countless others walking similar paths. The Brotherhood continued their work, expanding their network to additional states, helping more families, saving more lives. They never sought fame or recognition. They simply responded when people called, helped when help was needed, and stood beside survivors through the difficult process of building new lives. They'd learned that heroism didn't require capes or superpowers. It required showing up. It required caring enough to act. It required being willing to face consequences for doing what's right. Detective Chen retired from active duty after 30 years of law enforcement, but she didn't stop working. She became a consultant for police departments, implementing better domestic violence protocols. She trained officers in victim-centered approaches. She advocated for legislative changes that would better protect survivors and hold abusers accountable. She'd seen the worst of human nature in her career, but cases like Jennifer's reminded her that people were also capable of incredible compassion and courage. That balance, that complicated mix of darkness and light, was what kept her fighting for justice even after her official career ended. Patricia Wells continued her legal practice, but she specialized now in defending Good Samaritans who faced prosecution for helping others. She represented civilians who intervened in emergencies, who protected strangers from harm, who risked their own safety to save lives. She fought against unjust prosecutions, advocated for legal reforms, and wrote extensively about the need to protect and encourage civic virtue rather than punishing it. The Sarah Mitchell Act, her legislative achievement, had been adopted or adapted in 8 states, with more considering similar laws. It was her legacy, her contribution to ensuring that what happened to the Brotherhood would be less likely to happen to others in the future. Derek Thornton, after serving his sentences and parole violations, eventually moved out of state and disappeared from public view. Whether he changed, whether he found redemption, whether he continued his pattern of abuse with new victims, remained unknown. Some stories don't have neat endings for all characters. Some people remain mysteries, their futures uncertain. What mattered was that Jennifer and Sarah were free of him, that he no longer controlled their lives, that his shadow no longer darkened their days. Matthew Thornton did successfully turn his life around. He remained in Kentucky, worked construction, stayed clean from drugs, and eventually married and started a family of his own. He never contacted Jennifer or Sarah again, respecting the boundaries that needed to exist. He lived with the knowledge of what he'd participated in, the harm he'd caused, the life he'd nearly helped destroy. That guilt drove him to be better, to treat his own family with respect and kindness, to never let violence enter his home. It wasn't redemption exactly, but it was improvement. Sometimes that's all you can ask. 5 years after that June day, Sarah Mitchell, now 13 years old, was invited to speak at a national conference on domestic violence prevention in Washington, D.C. She'd become a confident young woman, articulate and passionate about helping others. She spoke to an audience of lawmakers, advocates and survivors about the need for comprehensive reform, for better resources, for laws that truly protect victims rather than just processing cases. And she told her story again, the story of a desperate 8-year-old girl who ran to bikers for help and found angels wearing leather instead of wings. The phrase had become her signature, repeated in every speech, printed on T-shirts sold to raise funds for shelters, adopted by motorcycle clubs and advocacy groups nationwide. It captured something important about challenging stereotypes, about finding help in unexpected places, about the complexity of human nature. Those words, spoken first on a stage in Nashville, now echoed in conference halls and legislative chambers across the country. They represented a shift in how people thought about domestic violence intervention, about who could be heroes, about what society owed to those who answered desperate calls for help. Jennifer, sitting in the audience as her daughter spoke to members of Congress, felt a profound mix of pride and pain. Pride in who Sarah had become, in her strength and courage and dedication to helping others. Pain in knowing what it took to create that strength, what suffering had forged that courage, what trauma had inspired that dedication. No parent wants their child to go through what Sarah experienced. But if it had to happen, if they had to survive that nightmare, at least they were using that experience to prevent others from enduring similar pain. That gave meaning to their suffering. That transformed their trauma into purpose. After the conference, Sarah asked to visit the Marine Corps War Memorial in Arlington. She wanted to see it, she said, because Bear had told her about it, about what it represented to him, about sacrifice and service and doing what's right, even when it's hard. They stood together, Jennifer, Sarah, and visiting Brotherhood members who'd ridden from Tennessee to support Sarah's speech, looking up at the iconic statue of Marines raising the flag on Iwo Jima. Bear explained the history, the battle, the meaning of the memorial. Sarah listened intently, then said something that brought tears to everyone's eyes. "You're Marines too," she said to Bear. "Maybe you don't wear uniforms anymore, but you're still protecting people who can't protect themselves. You're still fighting for what's right. You're still serving, just in a different way." Bear looked at this young woman who'd once been a terrified child, who'd grown into someone wise beyond her years, who understood things about sacrifice and service that many adults never grasp. "You're right," he said simply. "The uniform changed, but the mission didn't. Protect the innocent, stand against evil, never leave anyone behind. That's what Marines do. That's what we'll keep doing as long as we're able." And they did. The Brotherhood's network continued growing, reaching new states, helping more families, saving more lives. They became a model for how ordinary citizens could make extraordinary differences in their community. They proved that backgrounds didn't define futures, that society's judgments weren't always accurate, that people who looked dangerous could be exactly who you needed when danger arrived. They lived their values every day, answering calls, providing help, standing beside survivors through the long, difficult journey from victim to survivor to thriver. Jennifer's teaching career flourished. She became known as an educator who truly saw her students, who recognized trauma signs, who created safe spaces where children could learn and grow despite difficult home situations. She saved lives too, just in different ways, by intervening early, by reporting abuse, by advocating for children who had no other advocates. She used her experience to make sure other children didn't have to live the way Sarah had lived, in fear and silence, watching violence and believing it was normal. Every child she helped was a small victory against the darkness that had nearly consumed her own life. Sarah grew up to become exactly what she'd dreamed. She attended Tennessee State University, her mother's alma mater, studying social work with a specialization in family violence. She volunteered with the Brotherhood's network throughout college, answering calls, providing support, learning the complicated work of helping people escape danger. She graduated with honors and immediately went to work for the same non-profit that employed Bear and Tommy. The circle was complete. The child who'd been saved became the woman who saved others. The cycle of violence that Derek had perpetuated was broken by the cycle of healing and service that Jennifer and Sarah created in its place. 10 years after that June day, Rusty's Diner in Cookeville installed a permanent memorial in their parking lot. A simple bronze plaque set into the pavement where Sarah had first reached the Brotherhood's motorcycle. The plaque read, "On June 15, 2019, in this spot, a child's cry for help was answered by ordinary people who chose to do something extraordinary. Their courage saved a life and started a movement. May we all be brave enough to help when help is needed." The diner's owner, who'd witnessed everything that day, had commissioned the memorial as a reminder to everyone who visited that everyday heroes existed, that regular people could make profound differences, that answering a call for help was never the wrong choice. The memorial became an unofficial landmark, a place where people stopped to reflect, to remember, to commit themselves to being the kind of person who answered when others called for help. It appeared on maps, in guidebooks, in social media posts. Tourists visiting Nashville would detour to Cookeville to see it, to stand where Sarah had stood, to imagine what it took to make the choices all these people had made. The memorial wasn't just about honoring the past, it was about inspiring the future. It was about challenging everyone who saw it to ask themselves, what would I do? Would I have the courage to help? Would I risk everything for a stranger? The Brotherhood of the Road, these unlikely heroes in leather and denim, continued riding every Saturday, weather permitting. They still visited children's hospitals and domestic violence shelters. They still raised funds and delivered supplies. They still answered calls from people in crisis. But now they rode with a deeper understanding of what they represented. They weren't just motorcycle enthusiasts. They were symbols of what's possible when ordinary people decide that someone else's suffering matters more than their own comfort or safety. They were proof that society's judgments are often wrong, that appearances deceive, that the most unlikely people can be exactly who you need when danger arrives. Bear, now in his mid-60s, still led the Brotherhood. His beard had gone fully white. His body had slowed some, though he'd never admit it, but his commitment remained absolute. Every Saturday morning, he'd meet his brothers at that diner parking lot, right next to the memorial plaque, and they'd ride out together to make a difference somewhere, somehow. He'd seen more in his life than most people could imagine: war, violence, death, suffering. But he'd also seen incredible goodness. He'd seen a child brave enough to ask strangers for help. He'd seen a woman strong enough to survive years of abuse and build a new life. He'd seen brothers who'd stand beside each other no matter the cost. He'd seen a community rally around survivors and demand better from their justice system. He'd seen that change was possible, that hope was real, that good people still existed in a complicated world. As Sarah Mitchell, now 21 years old and beginning her professional career as a social worker, rode with the Brotherhood on that 10th anniversary, she looked around at these men who'd saved her mother's life, and in doing so, saved hers too. She thought about everything that had happened since that terrible, miraculous day. The pain, the healing, the growth, the purpose they'd all found in this work, the lives they'd saved together, the movement they'd started, the laws they'd changed, the cycle of violence they'd helped break for hundreds of families. She thought about that 8-year-old girl who'd run across a highway with tears streaming down her face, terrified and desperate, looking for someone, anyone, who might help. She thought about how unlikely it was that she'd found exactly the right people at exactly the right moment. She thought about all the ways things could have gone wrong, all the parallel universes where she didn't find help in time, where her mother died, where she grew up alone and traumatized. But that's not what happened. What happened was a miracle disguised as ordinary men on motorcycles. What happened was angels wearing leather instead of wings. And as the sun set over Tennessee on that 10th anniversary ride, as hundreds of motorcycles filled the highways with their thunder, as survivors and advocates and community members celebrated how far they'd all come and recommitted themselves to continuing this work, Sarah Mitchell smiled. She'd spent 10 years transforming her trauma into purpose, 10 years helping others find safety and healing, 10 years proving that survival was just the beginning, that what you did with your survival mattered even more. She'd become exactly who she needed to be. And it all started with a simple, desperate, "Please help my mama," and a simple, profound answer: "We will." This story forces us to confront uncomfortable questions about judgment, justice, and the masks we all wear. The Brotherhood of the Road did what many of us would be too afraid to do, stepping into violence to protect the innocent. But it raises the question, where is the line? When does protection become vigilantism? When does intervention become interference? These men risked everything, their freedom, their reputations, their lives, for a child they'd never met and a woman they didn't know. Sarah Mitchell got her miracle that day, but thousands of others still wait for theirs, trapped behind closed doors, suffering in silence. What do you think? Did the bikers do the right thing, or did they cross a line? Should civilians ever take matters into their own hands, even when someone's life is at stake? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We want to hear your perspective on this controversial moment. If this story moved you, please subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell. These are the stories that matter, the ones that challenge us to think deeper about justice, courage, and humanity. And don't miss our next recommended video, another true story that will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew.